time traveling, and a lot of that is in Europe, though I spend a lot of time going across the US, meeting with our suppliers as well. And then the remainder of my home is in Washington, D.C.
50% of your time you spend in Europe.
Yeah. Yeah. Or
That's
traveling at least. Yeah. And then most of
yeah,
that's in Europe. Yeah.
that's great. That's great. But you're based, your home, you're from the United States, basically. You're not European, moved to the United States.
No, I'm from Long Island in New York. Yeah.
Okay, okay. In your opinion, what are the similarities between Europe and the United States?
Well, each country is very different in Europe, and each state is very different in the US. So in that way, they're similar.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still very stereotypical. When I look at the United States, I see the country, the United States, and it takes some time to understand the subtleness that every state is different. Indeed, also in the United States.
Yeah, I guess maybe North Dakota and South Dakota are pretty similar, but most states are different.
Yeah. Let's jump into the topic of the conversation, climate change, climate tech, and nuclear energy.
Yeah.
I'm curious about your assessment. Climate tech, climate change is, I think, one of the hottest topics in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
What's your assessment in climate change? What is it?
Well, what are people's goals? Do you want to stop warming? Is that the goal? Because we're not doing that. We're also not reducing our emissions, which is a different goal. So yeah, it all depends. You see, if what you don't want is climate change, I would actually even first pose the question, what about climate change don't you want? Is it that you don't want the effect on a drought and, destabilization of our food systems? Is it that you don't want the destabilization of where people live? Is it that you don't want the poor people to be affected? All of these are very good reasons, but then you have to know why you're fighting for what you're fighting for, because there might be a simpler solution than what is often touted as the solution, which is net zero, which, by the way, net zero doesn't stop climate change. We have to go drastically negative, removing
Really?
historical emissions in order to make any impact. So I think people don't really know what they want, and but once you characterize what you want, it's usually pretty straightforward what the subset of solutions are.
In your opinion, how big is the problem really? I mean, I hear always two sides. One say we will die. If we don't do anything, the human race will go extinct. And the other side says it's normal, nothing serious will happen. In your opinion, how big is the problem that we face?
Well, once again, the question is like, what is the problem? If the problem is what is the impact that we have on the poorest in society, I'd say it's a very big problem. We should do something about that. If what you say is the problem is a number of degrees Celsius, I'd say that's not a problem. As a matter of fact, it might be nice if it was a degree Celsius warmer on planet Earth.
You mentioned that the measures that are currently taking in the United States and in Europe are not enough. You said that net zero is not enough. We need to do more. Can you dive a little bit deeper into this topic?
Yeah, net zero doesn't even make any sense as a goal. And then when you talk to any real policymaker, they say, well, it's just a catchy phrase and it's a good stepping stone to where we need to go. And I think that's logically incorrect. I think where we need to go, if you want to stop warming, if that's your goal to stop warming, you need to get back to an equilibrium state, right, with radiative forcing. What does that mean? That means you need 300 parts per million of CO2 in the air. Okay, well, that's a very different challenge than reducing future emissions. Okay, and one might want to assess, is it worth reducing future emissions at all if you can't get back into an equilibrium state? And I would say, due to positive feedback effects, no, there's no point in reducing future emissions at all if you're going to end up in the same place anyway because of these positive feedback effects that will eventually take over any emissions that people put into the air to begin with. So yeah, so it's like, yeah, it all comes back to what's your goal.
How would you define the right goal for us?
I'd say forget about the negatives, right? I don't think that we should be thinking in a negative framing. I actually don't think that helps very much, other than to get some people interested and some people excited and some people concerned. Yeah, the negatives help there. But in terms of what we really want to do, if we really want to inspire solutions, then what we should do is use the positive framing. So I think our goal should be increase human prosperity across the board, bring everyone out of poverty, bring everyone on our planet up to the greatest standard of living possible. And, if that has to do with climate change, and if climate change is part of the way to accomplish that, solving, or like stopping changing climate, great. But if there's another way that achieves that same end goal and leads to, another degree of Celsius or 2 warming, okay, that's great too, because my goal is prosperity for all humankind.
I love that. I couldn't agree more. I think positive goals are more attractive than fear-based goals. Prosperity for all humankind. I think we should remember that and make this the working assumption rather than threatening extinction, something like that. The role of innovation and technology, what role does it play when we want to get the human race to the next level?
It's everything. It's everything. If you think you can take a naturalist perspective and accomplish anything on this planet at this scale with where we are today, you're insane. Yes, technology is the key to a brighter future. Period. End of story.
That's great. That's great. I mean, I live in Europe, and my parents are from Germany. I'm here in Austria. And I think the market sentiment when it comes to achieving the goals that you mentioned currently is solar and wind. Is everything that we need and nothing more. Austria is absolutely against producing nuclear energy, but very positive in importing it. I mean, it's a matter of fact, we import it. What role does nuclear energy play?
I think Austria is against human beings. Like, as far as how do you feel about that? You're the one living there. I mean, it seems like everything that they want is less humans.
Oh, really? You think so?
I think yes, I think the Austrians, and I think well, now I'm painting with a broad brush. I don't mean literally everyone. I mean, as a culture, and also the parts of Germany that are most associated with Austrian culture, I think they would prefer a Malthusian perspective: reduce the amount of humans, reduce consumption, everyone, live in a naturalist society, and forego all future innovation. But that's just my perspective.
Where does this
of what they are? Yeah.
Where does this perspective come from?
Any Austrian I've interacted with and readings on the matter. Are you different? Do you feel differently? And do people in your culture and community feel differently?
Let me think about it. How should I phrase it in a correct way? I mean, Germany shut down nuclear power plants, which I think in a time when we face already shortages in electricity, it's not the right way to go. Here in Austria, there are indeed, in my opinion, some tendencies to go back to what you call a naturalist state of living, no technology at all. I mean, we have some new taxes that I don't think is is not really the right way to go to achieve the goals. I like more the positive formulation that you have, that we have to find ways to elevate the living standard, not reduce it, and at the same time for all human beings without destroying the environment. I think this is a matter of fact. I agree partially to your statement. To put more nuance, not everybody here thinks the same way, but I think it's a very fierce and tough discussion. I also see it in the United States. I think California is more tending towards the description that you gave before about Austria and Germany.
The elites of California. Let's separate the working man in California from the elite.
Yeah. How is the working class thinking about it?
I think the working class is much more practical. They want, they want to get to work inexpensively. They want to work hard. They don't think the government should just take care of everything for them because they've got a more realistic perspective on the limitations of government. No, I think the working class has the right perspective. And I think, oftentimes they might attack the issue of climate differently and be very wrong when they attack it on a scientific merit. But when I think they attack it on the merit of values, I think the working class has it right and the elites have it wrong.
I think we have a similar situation here in Europe. I see division between the elites and the working class. I think the working class are more practical. I mean, they want to survive and they want to live. They want to have they pay their rent, afford something to eat, while the goals of the elites are more far-fetched. Where does this division come from, in your opinion? Why are we drifting so far apart?
I don't know. I don't study. I don't study society. I have some opinions just based on what I see, but I don't know enough to comment intelligently on it.
When we look at climate change, when did you first start thinking about this topic?
2017. I just sold my last company and wanted to, and now I had some experience and I had some resources and I wanted to do something big and important with the next chapter of my life. I was living in San Francisco at the time and ready for a change from San Francisco as well. And so I thought, okay, let's try something interesting and ambitious and new. And so I moved to DC and started a research institute focused on this topic and used that as a vehicle to really explore several sectors, several solutions, explore the problem itself really for 2 years straight. And then only then did I launch Last Energy, which is a commercial developer of micronuclear technology and an IPP, an independent power producer, where we set up utilities and sell electricity to factories from our technology.
In my last episode, I had a speaker from Argentina, and he's building basically startups at scale. So every year, 6 to 10 new startups. And he said before he started his program, he took 1 year to research the area and think about if you want to go in this direction. What was your turning point? What was your turning point towards climate change?
I highly encourage that for anyone is spend a year or even 2 just kind of checking your own cognitive biases, because otherwise, especially when you're tackling such a difficult and complex business, you're going to be investing a decade or 2. You might as well invest a year or 2 up front to really make sure it's what you want to do. Where my turning points in discovery, well, I think the first was when I realized that everything that I knew about nuclear was wrong. So there are a couple principal facts that I came across in the first 3 months that made me question everything. And then, about public perception or waste or safety or security or its affiliation with weapons, all of this stuff, I was wrong and have a totally different understanding, but most people don't. And so that takes a few months. So that was a big turning point. And then a couple of years in, when I had understood why everyone, why society had such strong misconceptions and where that was coming from, when I finally understood the root cause of the issue, not the proximate cause, but the root cause, that was the fundamental turning point for me that allowed for me to decide to dedicate the rest of my life to this.
So you're on a mission for the rest of your life?
Easily.
Okay.
If not, life's after that.
Okay, that's great to hear. What are the 3 biggest misconceptions? I'm curious now to dive deep in this part.
Well, I think that the notion of hazard is a big misconception. People probably think radioactive materials are orders of magnitude more hazardous than they are because the regulations are orders of magnitude more strict. But those 2 things have absolutely nothing to do with each other. The reason that the regulations are strict is because the industry incumbents make a lot of money the more strict the regulations are, and has zero to do with the safety or hazard profile of the underlying technology itself. And so when you think of waste, people think of nuclear waste as the ultimate danger. It's actually not that hazardous, not that toxic. It is toxic, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't take much or compare very much to so many other toxins that we handle in quantities 1,000 times as large. So what do we do with all the heavy metals that we process? What do we do with all the chemicals that we process? What do we do with arsenic that's in your backyard or in your furniture? What do we do with the fire retardant, materials that are in your mattress? What do we do with it? We throw it in a landfill and you don't eat it. And that's all you need to do with nuclear waste too. Throw it in a landfill, don't eat it, you'll be fine. And so that's one, big misconception. Another is the hazard profile. Most people think, and once again, this is because this is what the nuclear industry tells them. They say nuclear is the ultimate hazard. If everything goes wrong, it goes really wrong. And we, the nuclear elites, we, the nuclear scientists, we in the ivory tower, only we the priesthood, only we can keep you safe. So that's what, as society has been told for, 5 decades now. And so by the way, I don't blame anyone in society for feeling that way. Like you are totally right to feel that way. You are 100% validated to feel that nuclear is dangerous, because the quote unquote nuclear experts for 50 years have been telling you it's dangerous, but they are wrong. And so we saw empirical evidence of this with Fukushima. You had not one, not two, but three full scale gigawatt size meltdowns where every single safety system failed, including the roof itself. And what happened? Nothing. Nothing. No one got hurt, no injuries from radiation, no deaths from radiation. That's with 0 safety systems and 3 meltdowns. So what do we have all of this protection for? What do we have all of these extreme regulations for? What do we have, almost 1 million people in the nuclear industry telling you that this is the ultimate hazard for? Well, it's because those 1 million people in the nuclear industry make a fuck ton of money protecting you from it.
What, in your opinion, when I grew up in the 70s, 80s, and I experienced Chernobyl and the time back then when kids were not allowed to leave the house because of radiation and stuff like that. What's the difference between Fukushima and Chernobyl in the magnitude of what happened?
Yeah, so, and this is a complex and nuanced topic. So let's just start off the fact with Chernobyl was not a normal power plant. It was a giant block of graphite with embedded uranium in it that happened to make power, but was designed to make weapons, nuclear weapons for the Soviet nuclear weapons industry. That type of reactor, the RBMK, is a special type that is used to make plutonium, weapons material. So and the whole city around it, Pripyat, like it was a secret city. Why? Because it was a wartime establishment meant to design a technology that could destroy the world. So that's a special type of reactor. That's not a reactor that is commonly used in commercial systems, only really in the former Soviet. Almost all reactors that are around, the 400 plus that provide 10% of world electricity are water-based reactors. That's like Fukushima. So what's that worst that happens in a water-based system? Well, the water boils off. The fuel could melt, yes, because of decay energy, not because of a runaway critical reaction. That can't happen in a water-based reactor. And then if the fuel melts, okay, the hazardous material, it sits in a puddle on the floor. Big deal. So very different, the two systems.
When you got interested in nuclear energy, and you started with climate tech and then came nuclear, and in this range you have other energy forms as well. What drew you to nuclear energy? I mean, wind, solar, these are all nice things to play around. Elon Musk is betting on solar, I guess. What made nuclear so attractive for you personally that you said, this is the thing that I want to do for the rest of my life?
If you actually care about decoupling industry from the environment, if you actually care about producing abundant energy for mankind, there is one solution and one solution only, and that is nuclear power. None of the other energy sources even hold a candle to it. When you were just look at the raw physics of it, amount of material in, right, steel, concrete, copper wire, whatever, versus electrons out, you are talking several orders of magnitude difference. So we're not talking about like a 20% advantage or a 50% advantage. That might be enough for me to make a very bold claim about how great a particular category of technology is. We're talking about 1,000-fold difference. So the real problem to solve is like, why does it cost so much? Why does it take so long to build? But once you solve those problems, we can enter into a new stage of humanity where we have 1,000 times as much energy for the same cost, for the same material consumption, for the same environmental impact. I mean, that is truly wondrous. And so that is why I'm dedicating the rest of my life to this one technology.
I mean, makes sense in my opinion. I'm very nuclear friendly here in Austria, but the narrative in Germany and Austria, especially coming from the left wing, is wind and solar are sufficient.
Yeah.
And when I listen to you, it doesn't sound like that. Can
Yeah.
you
Well,
can
if you listen to data, it doesn't sound like that either.
can you dive in the data? Why is wind and solar not enough?
So we could tackle this. We could tackle this from a climate perspective or from a carbon emissions perspective. We could tackle this from an energy perspective. We could tackle this from an economics perspective. I mean, any which way you look, these are pathetic, terrible energy sources. Now, don't get me wrong. It's nice to have clean air, and it's nice to be in an environment that has energy sources around you that don't emit, pollutants like a coal would. But in terms of their impact on the grid, in terms of their own embedded carbon emissions, I mean, what, you think that a solar panel doesn't have any carbon footprint to it? And then, when you think about a solar panel plus all of the energy storage that you say are going to make it function like a normal nuclear system, you don't think that has any carbon footprint to it? Pretty soon, the carbon footprint of solar plus storage plus all of the infrastructure changes that you have to make is looking an awful lot like combined cycle natural gas. And even if it was 50%, does that actually get you anything on your climate goals? No, not even close. So what's the point? Maybe clean air in some places? Yes, I support that. Great, do it. If you've got some subsidy or you've got, some infrastructure that allows you to swap out a dirty air pollutant energy source with a clean one, like, go for it, power to you. But if you're talking about making like climactic change or global change or changes to the energy poverty or changes to energy security, there is one answer, and that's nuclear, and it's by a long shot.
I just let the word sink in before I say something. I totally agree to what you say. I mean, clean air is great, but it always feels to me that we just shift the emissions to other continents, other countries. I mean, when I look at solar and wind, I think in Europe we are in this dire situation that 95% of the value chain is basically in China. And without Chinese products, we can't power this area. When the goal is being energy independent, I mean, you never know what happens in the world, and you need to have some basis production here in Europe. When I listen to you, it sounds like to me like there is no way around nuclear.
There's a way around it. We don't have to live in a magical, beautiful, wonderful society. We can live in like the present course of action forever. I mean, listen, the world is still pretty great. Don't get me wrong. So like, we don't need any of this. I'm just trying to paint a picture for a world that could be like better and better for everyone.
What are the three main advantages of nuclear?
Well, there's so many advantages, but we can talk about them from well, I guess like I'll start with decoupling energy's impact from the environment. The fact that you need so little to create so much, that's like obviously a huge advantage. That's just like philosophically from decoupling our human impact on the world. But when it comes from a grid, like a grid perspective, electrical perspective, which obviously we all care about, because as much as people talk about how they like climate, if they flipped the light switch and it didn't turn on, they would drop all of their climate goals. If they couldn't charge their iPhone, they would drop all of their climate goals. So let's just be pretty realistic for a second here. If you had to pay $100 more per month on your energy bill, you would drop all of your climate goals. So let's just be realistic about how important the grid is. And so what does nuclear do for the grid? Well, it's everything that you would want from an abstract perspective. Like if a grid was just to tell you, hey, like, here are the characteristics I want in an energy source. A lot of people talk about like base load. Okay, that means you can produce steady state power. What about dispatchable? Okay, you need more power. You can ramp up when you need it. You've got that capability. From a black start perspective, or what they call like ancillary services, from frequency matching, being able to keep the grid at 60 hertz, right? So you can actually like plug in your devices and they work. All, the momentum literally of the spinning magnet that creates that 60. Okay, so it's like all of these aspects that are important to the grid. Oh, the fact that you can match supply and demand. So if one city needs this much power, you can source that much supply next to that city, because nuclear, you can dislocate it from environmental requirements. You don't need to be next to a body of water. You don't need to be next to a train track. You don't need to be in a sunny area. You don't need to be in a windy area. You can put it literally anywhere that you want. You could put it underground if you want. So, so that's another characteristic of nuclear that sets it far and above all the other energy sources.
Ah, that's great. That's great to hear. I mean, we experienced here in Europe, especially here in Austria. I mean, Austria powers the grid with natural gas from Russia, and there were some uncertainties. So we saw the surges and the spikes in energy prices, and within a couple of weeks, the prices went up by about 600%. And this was when I started thinking, okay, what happens if we don't have electricity? I was just saying, I can fold up my life and throw it away. I
Yeah.
can't do my job anymore. So we are highly dependent on electricity.
Yeah. Oh, another good thing about nuclear. Sorry, I just realized historically it has been cheap and it has been fast to build. So that's the thing. It's like my two biggest criticisms about nuclear, the two things that need to change. We have historical precedent, right? So the power plants that we built, from the 1968 to 1971 in the U.S., those are producing power at like $20 a megawatt hour. Like that's as cheap as it gets, and it's base load. So that's like the real cost. You don't have to add all these other system costs to it. So yeah, so affordability, that's the other big one.
The narrative here in Europe is that against nuclear energy, especially from Germany, is they're expensive and it takes a long time to build a power
Yeah,
plant. We talk
they're
about
right.
1 or 2 decades.
And they're right, and they're right, and they are right. Those are the problems to solve. Those are good criticisms, and we should tackle those problems, but they aren't inherent to the technology. They are a function of today's regulatory environment, of the other societal maybe confluencing factors, your bureaucracy. They have nothing to do with the technology itself.
If you could model an ideal environment for your company, which is basically building power plants, and you can take any obstacle away that is within the legal system, that is within regulations, within politics, and economics. So let's assume everything is solved. In the ideal world, how long would it take to build a power plant from scratch until to a point where it's delivering electricity?
Well, if we're talking about typical stick-built construction, 18 months, because that's what this size infrastructure takes to build for like a natural gas plant or, coal plant or so we know that you can build this amount of power infrastructure in that period of time using traditional building and construction methodologies because we see it all the time. It's just all of these additional requirements and certifications and licenses that drive nuclear to that point. And in my case, is most of those are unnecessary or could be very easily streamlined. Listen, we build skyscrapers. We build skyscrapers in shorter periods of time, and they have thousands of people that their lives depend on them getting those calculations for steel and concrete and structural materials and the foundation and the geotech report. Like thousands of lives are on the line for getting that stuff right. And we build skyscrapers all over the place all the time, really fast. Like so we can do that for nuclear too. Even if you were to claim that there is this tremendous hazard, you should also claim that there's a tremendous hazard with building a skyscraper. Wrong. So but we do that all the time. So there's no reason that can't be our goal for traditional stick-built technology, traditional construction, to do it that fast. Our process, what we're looking to do with Last Energy, is bring in automotive manufacturing principles into the production of high throughput manufacturing for nuclear power plants. So we want to change the paradigm, and instead of having a bunch of construction projects that are built in parallel, what we want to do on site, what we want to do is centralize production and then just keep cranking up the dial on our throughput. So the first year that we have a factory up and running, we want one nuclear power plant per week to come off the assembly line. Then after that, 1 per day. Then after that, 3 per day. Then after that, 10 per day. So we just want to keep increasing the throughput from what a factory can do in terms of delivering nuclear power plants.
So when, for example, Austria would decide to go towards nuclear power plants, and we streamlined the administration, the governmental administration. You could hand over a nuclear power plant within 18 months. Did I
I don't
understand it
think
right?
it's ever going to happen in Austria, but I'll
In
build.
the ideal world, in the ideal world.
In the ideal
For your
world, I don't want
business.
anything to do with Austria. I'll build 100 along the border of Austria and Slovenia, and I'll just sell them power over the border.
I think Czech Republic would also be a great place for
Well, Czech
Hungary. So
Republic, yeah, exactly.
yeah. But in this ideal world that you described for your company, you have the capability to build a nuclear power plant basically within 18 months. So it's not a very long-term project. It's not a long-term project. It's a
No, and I think
solution.
it could be much, much faster too. I think that's a conservative estimate.
That's good to hear. That's promising. But we don't live yet in this ideal world. The world is more complex, more complicated. And what I would like to learn from you is, I mean, from my perspective, I'm a fan of nuclear. I think in the same direction than you do. But when I looked at all these problems, I had no way I go down this route. I have a business background. I have not a physics background or something like that. So it's far too complicated for me. What made you going? Why did you decide in that space to start a company when it's so complicated?
Are you asking why I'm a glutton for punishment? Is that the question? Are you asking like why I like to torture myself? No, listen, it's a challenge just like any other. It might be the greatest challenge of all, but every challenge has a solution. And if you take like a first principles analytical approach, it does not matter how big the challenge is. It does not matter how complicated. It does not matter how hard. It is still just a challenge. And you just work your way through it and eventually you solve it.
Can we walk through the different steps of your thinking process from the first idea to start something in the energy space to the point where you flipped the switch and said, okay, I build a company? How did you approach this problem that walked you to this point where you said, okay, this is the right place, there is a place for a company? What is your thinking process?
Well, building a company is one of many possible solutions to solve a problem. But companies, as opposed to being a consultant or working for or trying to solve it through government, companies have the ability to be much more agile. And so when you don't have when you don't have a very clear path laid out, when you know there are going to be a lot of new challenges that you have to encounter, and you have to be able to shift resources and priorities and focus, and who you hire and what they do very quickly. A company is a great organizational structure to do that, as opposed to a government institution, a nonprofit, you name it. And so that's why a company was the right vehicle to affect the type of change that we wanted to see.
That's a great point. But looking at the first starting point and the research you did, what was the signal that you felt to create a company?
Okay. Well, yeah. So I spent 2 years on just research. I launched a podcast myself, Titans of Nuclear, and then we launched a second one, the Energy Impact Podcast, to really pressure test all of our assumptions, meet with all of the experts across policy, economics, technology, industry, regulations, you name it. So really wanted to do our homework and understand, really what the challenge was, what the right problem to solve is. I cannot emphasize that enough. Spend as much time as you need to solve the correct problem, because if you solve the wrong problem, you could do a great job and you're going to be the only one who cares. So once it took me 2 years to figure out what was the right problem to solve. And while I had a suspicion that it was solving the constructability of nuclear power plants, not the reactor physics of nuclear power plants, which is the approach virtually every other commercial effort and government effort in this space is that's the route they go. Reinvent the reactor. We say reinvent the construction paradigm and leave the reactor alone. The reactor is great as it is. So that's the approach that we developed, but that wasn't sufficient for me to have sufficiently de-risked starting a business. What I also had to do, and this is what took the remaining year and a half, was to figure out why was nobody else doing it this way. Because until I had that answer, I didn't feel comfortable that there wasn't some key fundamental flaw in my logic. And that took, full 2 years to really understand. And the answer was pretty simple. In hindsight, it's pretty simple, but very complicated to model and very complicated to prove initially. Essentially, what had happened was through a series of historical events and economic forces, macroeconomic forces, really, and the way that institutions and governments and regulators and incumbents had evolved, the nuclear industry became its own worst enemy. The nuclear industry did not actually want to make cheap nuclear power plants. They wanted to make them as expensive as possible to sell their radiation protection services, to sell their waste cleanup, to sell their complex safety systems, much like, the TSA, a lot of safety theater, not a lot of extra safety. And so, but that became the business that everyone who got into the nuclear industry, whether it be from academia or whether it be from the regulatory side or whether it be from another industry, there's that expression, you can't have a man understand something that he's paid not to. Well, if every single job in the nuclear industry is working against delivering cost-effective nuclear and instead working towards making nuclear as expensive and difficult as possible because that's how they make money, well, that became the answer that I needed to fully understand why the more simple approach hadn't been tried to this point.
I think this is an important part for every entrepreneur. I think everybody at one point in time who is interested in investing and entrepreneurship realizes that when everybody is already doing something like artificial intelligence these days, or 2 years ago, blockchain, it's not the right point to start a business. But the problem with the contrarian approach that you described, in my opinion, is the question, why is, as you phrased it, why is nobody doing it? What holds people back? Or am I really the only person who sees that? Then it's an opportunity. Or am I the only one who would be willing to try it because everybody else already found out it's not worth it? How did you feel? What happened in you that you said, okay, it's an opportunity. It's a real opportunity. I want to go in this direction, and didn't decide to say, okay, it's not worth pursuing it. What happened in you to make this decision?
Well, like I said, I want to do something big. My goal, first and foremost, is to affect positive change on the world. My goal is not to be more popular. And so I think so many entrepreneurs that come into the nuclear sector, and now it's more popular than it's ever been, but there are very few entrepreneurs from the outside world coming in, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And then, and it was very unpopular to say, hey, I'm starting a nuclear company. Even people from the nuclear industry often said, oh my God, and this is really crazy, by the way. I mean, this is truly crazy, but I interviewed all of the entrepreneurs in the nuclear sector, and all of them said nuclear is a bridge technology. It's not the ultimate technology. Oh, we should hold hands with solar and wind. They're the better technologies. We're just trying to help out. And I'm like, you guys are that. So that was the perspective of every entrepreneur from within the nuclear industry 6 years ago. And then 3 years ago, nuclear started getting popular. But now any entrepreneur that comes in, they're only willing to be a nuclear entrepreneur if they can maintain their social status, if they can say the things that, make them popular at a dinner party. So there aren't any nuclear entrepreneurs that are, out there that are willing to say, hey, the issue isn't safety. It's not waste. It's not public perception. It's the boring stuff. It's like, how do you build it cost effectively? And by the way, all these people who are saying that they're making a safe reactor are actually making the whole system worse in some way. And they're scaring people. They're not alleviating their fears. So nobody's willing to say that. That comes into the industry now because they care too much about what other people think about them. I'm fortunate in that I just don't care.
I think this is a good starting point for creating a company, to build something lasting and great. But how do you deal on a daily basis with that situation? I think when you challenge all the assumptions that other people learned to live by, not everybody is happy.
No, I piss off a lot of people. I have way more enemies than friends.
How do you handle this as an entrepreneur?
What do I care? But nobody's coming to kill me. So like my personal safety is not at risk. So what do I care?
Yeah, that's I think this is the right approach. This is the right approach. You talked a couple of times about the first principle approaches and how you've implemented it in Last Energy. Can you dive a little bit deeper in that? What is the first principle approach and how do you live it at Last Energy?
Yeah. So like simpler is better. That's like number one. Like solve the right problem always. So if the problem is cost, if the problem is schedule, it's like only tackle construction issues. Don't get I mean, it's like very tempting to like bring new technologies, but if you don't need it, like cut it out of the system. Like get your minimum viable product up and running. Satisfy the regulators. Listen, we still have to satisfy the regulators. So we still have to layer on all of these additional systems to make the regulators happy. Like, we're not just going wild like cowboys, but do the bare minimum necessary to satisfy what the regulators are imposing on you, because it's already 10,000 times more restrictive than it needs to be to guarantee the public safety. But just so make sure you don't kind of get into that mode of always overdoing it. One thing that we apply here is an engineering principle where it's like, if there is a simpler solution, instead of like layering on complex solutions, if you can just apply the solution that you have, but with, let's say, an extra factor of safety, an extra margin, more conservative on the equation, like do it, right? Add an extra inch of steel to your pressure vessel instead of trying to have, a pressure vessel that's thinner, but then also like a special spray system that can cool it down from the outside to resist thermal stresses, right? So it's like, that's a lot of the stuff that we do to make sure that, we're delivering on this like first principles basis of just the simplest product, the minimum viable product, get it out the door, show that it works. You're already going to make so much more money if you operate in high energy markets. Like over time, you can add complexity in order to eke out those extra percentage points of efficiency.
How do you motivate your employees to live by this principle?
Yeah, that's a good question, I guess. And something that like we still are trying to work on. I'm very lucky in that a lot of people that I work with are naturally self-motivated and naturally aligned with this. And maybe there's some selection bias with who finds themselves here, but how to implement it institutionally, I don't have a good formula for yet.
Let me know when you found it. Let me know when you found it. I mean, I think in a daily practice, it means that every day employees go to the office, challenge the status quo, and then say, okay, I found a better way to do this. So it's a constant state of change that your organization lives by. Is this a correct understanding?
So it's tough. It's tough. Yeah, like organizational management is complex and nuanced, and in many ways more difficult than engineering or technology. So at risk of saying something I don't mean or I'll regret later, I'll just answer with it. It's complicated.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe this. Let's talk about the USP of Last Energy. What's your secret sauce that you bring to the industry?
What was that? What was that acronym that you used? What was that?
The unique selling proposition.
Unique selling proposition. Okay. Well, we're gonna have to spell it out because I don't know. I didn't recognize that at first. I don't know if your audience does, but okay, unique selling proposition. Well, what we say is that we come to market with we sell electricity. We don't sell a fancy technology and then try to offload that on someone else. So we say, hey, like we're gonna put our money where our mouth is. We're gonna raise the money on our dime. Like we're gonna build it. We're gonna own it. We're gonna operate it. You only pay us for the electrons that you receive, just like a utility. So it properly aligns all the incentives and all of the risk. And this is why we've been so commercially successful to date, is because we found that product market fit where we realized the customers don't want to buy a nuclear power plant. They want to buy electricity with the characteristics that come from a nuclear power plant. And so we're like, great. Like that's our unique selling proposition. That's what we'll sell you.
That's great. And you do it globally.
And we do it in several select markets in Europe. So UK, Netherlands, Romania, Poland, these are our markets.
That's great. That's great. I think Europe is also another layer of challenge. adding to the
It is,
complexities.
it is, it is, it is. But you know what? Power prices are also very high, and the rule of law is very good. So that's it's a trade-off, and one that we're willing to take.
Yeah, I think we need something. I don't think that wind and solar also in Europe is sufficient to tackle the challenges we have. And I think the only reliable energy source that we currently have on the market is nuclear energy, whether we like it or not. If we want to electrify entire society and replace all vehicles here in Europe with electric cars, I think we need more production.
Do people actually want to do that? They say they want to do it. Do they really want to do it? I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, I think, in my opinion, the question is it feasible?
Yeah,
This is
yeah,
more
exactly.
what I think about. Do they want to do it? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't know. I think a lot of people, and this is maybe more philosophical and a semantics argument, but when people say that they want to do something, like if you were to actually tell them what was involved, would they still want to do it? Does that mean they actually wanted to do it to begin with, or they just wanted to say the words "I want to do it" and not actually open their mind to all of the challenges and to all of the cascading impacts on society?
Um, I think the political will at this point in time here in Europe is to, let's say, to only allow electric vehicles on the market, which makes a lot of people follow
We'll
for obvious reasons.
we'll see. We'll see, because you say it's the political will, but is it a sustained political will? Because what I see is that the more that we impose the burden on society from changing their lifestyle, both from a cost perspective and infrastructure perspective, their ability to drive across the country, their ability to drive into London without paying an extra tax, I think that we're going to start to see a lot more nationalist uprisings. And I think that political will change very quickly. I think this electric vehicle utopia that European imagines is like a brief moment in time before the nationalists take over all of Europe.
I think we're on a good way towards that direction when you look at the latest elections here in Europe. I think the underlying motivation that probably also the nationalist parties, I mean, if this power shift really happens, will soon discover is we can't ruin our environment. I think this is the positive underlying motivation behind this European way of electrifying the entire logistic chain, which, in my opinion, is not really feasible. But if we do that, and if we go really down that route and say, okay, combustion engines, we eliminate it, we need nuclear at the end of the day.
Yes,
Um,
yes, 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 exactly.
so, I mean, however I look at this problem, I think we need more power production.
Yes.
And your company, when I found it, was quite interesting, because when I looked at Crunchbase, I saw that you secured 3 million seed funding for going towards the nuclear space. And I thought 3 million is not really sufficient for that. And then I read a little bit deeper and found more sources. And I read that in practically no time, you secured over 30 billion contracts.
Yeah,
Is
30
this,
billion in contracts. Yeah, that's right.
how did you do that? I mean, this is an amazing number.
Yeah, we aligned. Yeah, we found product market fit. We realized that customers don't want to buy nuclear technology. They want to buy electricity with the characteristics as if it was produced from nuclear technology. And so the reason that we've been able to sign over $30 billion worth of power sales is because we're selling power, not nuclear technology. Now, of course, in order to realize that revenue, we have to go build a bunch of power plants, but okay, that's our job. That's what we're going to do.
How long does it take to sign these contracts
Well,
from the start of the negotiation until the finalization?
yeah, it's a good question because we're getting better at it. So like our recent data might skew towards a little faster, but I would say your sales cycle for any like major industrial deal is usually about 2 years. And we're getting much better at it, and we've been doing it and have started a lot of these conversations several years ago as well. So, yeah.
I mean, my experience in the construction industry is about 2 decades ago when my partner by this time, she worked for an Austrian company that was building basically power plants, not a nuclear one. And I remember that it's 5 to 6 years. I mean, all these political negotiations and this administration behind it just lengthens the process. And that's why I was so positively surprised when I read that your more complex topic attracted such a huge amount of deals in practically no time.
And it's only going to be more. I mean, we want to do trillions of dollars of energy sales, and we think that's quite realistic as well.
What's your long-term goal for Last Energy?
Fundamentally transform the way that humanity produces and consumes energy. Abundant energy for all humankind, eliminating poverty, eliminating air pollution, clean, fresh water for everyone on planet Earth.
That's great. That's great. That's great. So nuclear is basically just a stepping stone towards that direction.
It's more than a stepping stone. It is the stepping stone. It's the key enabler of the world that we want.
When we look into the future, let's say Last Energy, I mean, Amazon started in 1994, if I remember it right. We are now in 2023. So we have almost 30 years of corporate history. When you look 30 years in the future of Last Energy, how will Last Energy look like?
Yeah, at that point, we're hoping to be producing tens of thousands of gigawatts of nuclear power and using that to fuel our ambitions for positive world change.
How many power plants, if you had to put it in a presentation, how many power plants would we need for achieving that goal?
I think it depends on the size of the power plant. So right now we make a 20 megawatt power plant. That's because it's easy to get our manufacturing supply chain up and running at that small of a size. But over time, I'm sure we'll increase the power output. How much we'll increase it, it's hard to say. But then, yeah, it's just gigawatts that we want to deliver divided by, amount of power per plant. And that's how many plants that'll be. But yeah, the best way to imagine what our company will look like when we're delivering on that promise will be much more like an automotive manufacturer, much more so than a traditional construction company.
When we look towards the future, I think everybody agrees that we want to have a bright future for every human being on the planet, clean water, healthy food, have healthy nutrition, sufficient electricity, and that everyone can pursue their dreams. And when we look at the world today, in your opinion, what are the 3 biggest challenges that we need to solve today that we direct humanity towards a brighter future?
Maybe let me try to understand where your question is coming from, because oftentimes when people ask that, they're like, well, I want someone to then go do that thing, right? Or I want the government to help in some way. So the question is the question actually, can we ask for change from other people? Because the way I always see the problem is, if you want to do something different, you have to take the responsibility yourself. And so I don't think anyone needs to change anything. It's totally incumbent upon myself to affect the change that I want to see. And I give everyone else that freedom as well. I don't ask anything of you. If you want to do something, do something.
That's just, it's an open question. It's an open question, basically.
Yeah.
With no underlying motivation.
Yeah.
And what when people would ask for advice from you and say, okay, what should I do? What should I change in my life? What would you say to them?
I don't know. If I have enough time to get to know them. I mean, some of my best friends, like I could talk to them for hours and still not have good advice for them, because you have to really listen to people and try to understand. Like everyone's got a different path. There's no one size fits all advice for entrepreneurship, for business, for life, for anything. And so I hate to tell other people what to do. So sorry, that's not a very good answer.
Mm. Um, the cycles in, I think, all industries, there's ups and downs. I think also in your industry, you experience the same. You have the highs and the lows. And a few years ago, it was everything blockchain. Now we're in artificial intelligence. When I look at the energy sector, it was pretty stable a couple of decades ago. And now we hear everything: wind, solar, energy, hydrogen, nuclear. How do you personally deal with this noise around you? Do you have a daily routine that you keep? Do you have some special exercises that keeps you motivated and move
I
forward?
just drink a lot of Dr.
Dr.
Pepper
Pepper,
nonstop all day long.
that works.
Yeah.
What is so special about Dr. Pepper?
Oh,
I
it's so
think we don't
sweet.
have it in Europe.
It's so sweet. It's like the best taste. It's like the best flavor. Like, I mean, Coke is fine, but like Dr. Pepper is the best.
Do we have it in Europe? Did you find it in Europe on your
I don't
travels?
know, but it's like from the 1800s, I think. I think it's one of the
Hmm.
oldest flavors. It's awesome.
I have to look at our shops here, the grocery stores in Europe. I think I don't recall it. I don't remember it.
I'll bring you a pack next time I visit.
This would be great. When you're in Europe, let me know. Let me
Yeah.
know. We have, I think, 3 minutes left. Is there anything open that you would like to address on this recording that we didn't talk about?
No, I mean, obviously, my antagonism towards Austrians is more for a hot take than for actual, more than an actual cultural opinion. But so other than asking for forgiveness for anyone that I insulted, I think that's all.
I don't think you insulted anybody. But I think, I mean, if you can work on helping people understand the benefits of nuclear power and get rid of some misconceptions so that we can also here in Europe stabilize the energy production, it would be a really great thing.
Awesome. Will do.
Bret, thank you very much for your time, for this amazing conversation. I enjoyed it a lot, and keep pushing forward with your team and change the world.
Thank you. Great to meet you as well.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.